You guys really do a very good, careful, methodical job of sort of analyzing and critiquing what's been going on in the media since you started the podcast. I really appreciate it. Even when I disagree with you, which is not often, but it's always very, very thoughtful and careful. And what do you, I mean, I can summarize for the audience kind of your take on things, but I'd rather you do that. So why don't you just give us sort of your general feeling about what's going on with the media? I mean, to me, it's an absolute shit show. Very little in media is worthwhile. Certainly legacy media, I think, is essentially all corrupt. I don't think there's any part of legacy media that I think has any worth anymore. Like, I grew up with the New York Times.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk about the New York Times first of all. Okay, let me tell you my story about the New York Times. So when I was growing up, that was the paper of record. We subscribed to it. Even in Berkeley, we got as soon as it was distributed nationally, it was showing up on our doorstep every day. I read it cover to cover. Then when I moved to New York in my mid-20s. I read that damn paper cover to cover every single day for 20 years, Katie. And even then, I knew that it was essentially in the tank for the Democrats, but I still felt like they did some serious reporting. They did take some questions seriously. They did actually have some curiosity, which is really what journalism to me is about. And now, and I've heard you talk about this in similar ways, but now it's to me, it's as if it's been written by college freshmen at Brown or something. I mean, it is not even, I never believed in journalistic objectivity. I always thought that was a complete scam, basically. But there's not even an attempt to pretend that they're being objective. It is simply, it's clear that they're doing everything they can to undermine Trump, no matter what he says and no matter what he does. And almost every sentence, they have to put a clause saying, well, Trump said this terrible thing, and therefore, the rest of this, you must oppose him for what he's saying now. So what do you think about this? I mean, why now? And because it preceded Trump, I mean, it was starting before Trump appeared, right? And you've been on this beat in a sense, you're not just the trans person. You're not just the critic of trans issues. You've also been very much a critic of the media. So what the fuck? I mean, how did that, central institution in American cultural life become what it's become? Just the New York Times alone.
I mean, I think a couple things are going on. Part of it is a reaction to Trump and this resistance journalism. I think Ben Smith called it that. And I think there is a very real desire on the part of reporters to be on what they see as the right side of history. And so they have turned into activists. Mm-hmm. And the problem with activists is that activists are almost by definition myopic. And I don't, you can be an activist and be a journalist, but it needs to be transparent.
Right.
And that's the problem, is that it's often not. So I think that's part of it. I also think there's economic forces here, the hollowing out of local papers due to first Craigslist and then Facebook and Google scooping up ad dollars, first from local papers and now from digital outlets that are all failing as well, for better or worse. And when you don't have, like right now, a lot of reporters, if you want to be a reporter, 40, 50 years ago, it was sort of a working class job. You go and you learn the trade. You start out at your local paper, you work a beat, you follow the cops or the courts or the school board or whatever. And then maybe you work your way up to a regional paper or a national paper. Right. That's not what I did. And that's not what most people are doing these days. What you do these days is you start out as a blogger. Right. You're voicey, you build your own brand as a reporter. And the way to make a living, the way to get published and the way to get money and to, get notoriety is to have a name. And you don't do that by covering the school board. You do that by being voicey and opinionated and doing what I did. So while this has been good for my career, I think it's been, bad for the institution itself and bad for the Republic. And then there's social media. The incentives have changed, right? So 15 years ago, if you wrote something for your paper, for your weekly paper, your newspaper, whatever, that people hated, maybe they would send a letter to the editor or an email to the editor. Before that, they would maybe send a letter, but you got to get a stamp and an envelope and you got to write it and then you send it in and maybe your editor is going to tell you about it. Like if it's really funny, maybe like stick it on a wall somewhere, but probably it's not going to have that much of an impact on what you do. And now, because of social media and just sort of the vibe of the country, the zeitgeist right now, the incentive is to not piss people off, or to piss people off, but you got to piss off the right people, right? And I think reporters are terrified of becoming the character of the day on Twitter, or of pissing off their colleagues, because then you're in a hostile working environment. You have Slack, which means that everybody in a company can weigh in on the editorial process and what reporters are doing. So it's not just getting feedback from your immediate colleagues, it's also getting feedback from the tech people who have, who might have like worked for Facebook for a few years, but then they decide they want to join the resistance.
Right.
So they join the New York Times. And they don't understand the ethos of journalism. And they think that, the job of the journalist really is to take down the president, not to report what's happening.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of things going on here, but mostly I think the incentives have changed. The incentive is no longer to be balanced and just report the facts. The incentive is now to be a part of the resistance.